Good morning once again, everyone. I hope that you all are doing well. I'm just very excited to be here this morning. I'm thankful for the opportunity that we have to be together. This weather is perfect. It's cold, but it's not freezing to the point where no one can move. Cars can still start. Water's still running. Things are good. And I think it's the perfect weather for either a braai or a fireplace or something. Just anything to create some heat. But in any case, for those of you who might have missed last week's service, you might have heard about the very active service that we had, because at one stage we were all facing that way, then we were facing this way, and then we were facing that way, and then this way, and it sort of went on like that. And the whole reason for this was to remind us that God sometimes wants us to receive a message, but then also we need to be ready to give a message. And it also served another purpose. It kept us all awake during the service, which I think is a good thing. And because this morning is such a stay-at-home, in-bed weather morning as it is, I decided for this morning to do something different. We're going to be walking around the block no, I'm just kidding. In any case, we're not going to be doing that. What we are going to be doing is we're going to be using our imaginations and pretend that it's nice and warm. And I really want you to go with me on this journey that we're going on now. So we're going to be braaiing here later on today in our heads. We're going to be having this vision of us all gathering. This place being filled with many people. Some of them you like, some of them you don't. Now see this picture in your head. Try and figure out where you'll be standing, who you'll be speaking to, what you'll be speaking about. But then taking a little bit further, you realize that this is okay, the music's okay, nothing special, but then suddenly you hear a song that you actually like. So now things are getting better. And then because this is your imagination, you can invite some people, and they'll be there. So now they rock up to the party, and they're also here. Now there's people here that you actually want to talk about. Now see the change in your whole mentality. See what you're thinking about, see what you're talking about, and now it's good, and it's wonderful, and it's fun, and you have the meat that you never buy because it's too expensive. Now you have that, it's brilliant. And then suddenly your boss arrives, so now you're not so happy, because now it's not so much that you don't like him, it's just he doesn't know anyone here, so he's sort of talking to you, and he's clinging on to your conversation, which in itself is not a problem, but there's something inside you that sort of restricts you from speaking about the things that you want to speak about, or about complaining about your work, as you normally would have at this braai. So now you're sort of caught in between. So now your whole personality and everything shifts again. But then taking this further, because it's your imagination, we're inviting some few extra guests. You see a party bus pull up, and then we have a few famous people. Now, if it was my party, I'd invite people like Elon Musk, like Hideo Kojima, a bunch of other people you don't know about. But for me, it would be very interesting. You might be inviting Elvis, and then you're saying, but he's dead. I know, it's your imagination, work with me. So you might invite Elvis, you might be inviting Cher or Justin Bieber, whoever it is, and then suddenly you see this whole party changing again. And now it's brilliant. And now suddenly you don't care about your boss because you're not going to be complaining about your work anyway. Because you're going to be fixated on this person taking selfies, although that might not be something that you generally do. I promise you that's something that you will do at this event. And now suddenly you're braaiing again, the meat is finally ready, but then Jesus arrives. And that changes the dynamic completely. Now to one extent it's wonderful, but then you start questioning, like, where am I exactly? Like, will he know my name? Will he not? How am I feeling about this whole situation? Like, on the one hand, I know I'm supposed to be excited, but I remember I didn't listen yesterday, and like I didn't wake up this morning early as I wanted to. And that's not the whole point of this message, although that is a very good self-reflecting thought that I would like you to continue thinking about after the service. But the thing that I've noticed in thinking about this whole story is when we talk about these things, when we think about these parties or about church in general, one of the biggest complaints people have about church is how people are one way at church and completely different outside of church. Now, on the one hand, that's a very valid argument. But then I also want to shed some light on the thing that depending on who you're with, you change your personality. I can guarantee you the whole lot of you change your personality about 5 times depending on who you were speaking to at this party. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's the same as Sophia. Very often she is my wife. She's always my wife, but very often I treat her as my wife. And sometimes, every now and again, when we play board games or we have a laugh, or when I irritate her, she's my best friend. Because that's what you do. You have fun with each other. You have fun. So it's good. And the thing is, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to keep this in mind. And now you're thinking, Johan, but you started the message, but you haven't even started with Scripture. because I need to lay this foundation of how people change depending on where they are and who they're with. And that's important for us to bear in mind, especially with this service where, for those of you who saw it, I had a chameleon on the screen here earlier, and I really want us to sort of focus on that. Let me just keep that away for now. But what we have is we have this chameleon mentality, and let me not jump ahead of myself. So where we are in the book of Acts, we've started, and it's very interesting in my opinion. I love the book of Acts. It sort of starts a bit slow, although it starts with the Holy Spirit, and the church develops from a group no bigger than basically the group of us, and then it develops because the Holy Spirit comes and he opens the hearts of all those who hear the gospel, and then suddenly the church explodes to 3,000 and 5,000 and just thousands upon thousands, and we see the internal conflict about those who are not fully committed as others, and people die, but people get saved and people get healed, and it's this whole whirlwind of things that are happening to this point where we see people facing persecution, people facing death, martyrdom. And it's just horrible to see all of this happen in a time that should be good. And then one of the sort of leader of the pack, Paul, then known as Saul, has this whole issue where it's difficult because he wants to kill people with everything in him, but he still needs to follow certain regulations. And he does lead people into persecuting the church to a very, very bad place. But then he gets converted. And it's brilliant. And God saves him. And God sends him to spread the message. And we see him go from the first missionary journey where, as we know, he was stoned sort of to death. And then he just thought it was a good thing because he followed God's instruction. Then the second missionary journey and the third missionary journey. And as he was closing off this third missionary journey, he felt it in his heart to go to Jerusalem even though bad things would happen to him. But he stayed committed. Everyone else said, don't do it. Although they heard the same message, but he thought about God's purpose, not his comfort. And that's sort of where we're going today. We're starting with Jerusalem. And before we start with the scripture, would you maybe mind passing some blankets that we've got there at the back around, if you don't mind, my love? Thank you. Okay, so we're continuing with the book of Acts. Who here wants a blanket? Let's be those people. Is anyone a little bit cold? There's nice comfy blankets? Okay, then I'm just wasting everyone's time. Thank you, my love. Let's carry on. I'm going to edit this out. Sorry, I see everybody sitting like this. I'm thinking, well, let's just see if we can make it more comfortable. In any case, so we're continuing with the book of Acts. And for those of you taking notes, we're in Acts 21, verse 17. And now we're going to be reading a lot, so please do focus. And just enjoy the fun, enjoy the narrative. And it says, when we had come to Jerusalem, so this is Luke speaking to Paul. When we had come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. On the next day, Paul went with us to James, and all the elders were present. He greeted them and recounted one by one what God had done amongst the Gentiles through the ministry. Now, Gentiles being the non-Jewish believer. When they heard this, they glorified the Lord and said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews there were who believe, and they are zealous for the Lord. They have been informed concerning you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children, nor to observe the customs. What then shall be done? The assembly shall certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Now I need to pause there because this is confusing. Because Paul gets to these elders, the leaders of the church, Peter and James and all these guys, and he's saying God is saving the Gentiles by the thousands. It's wonderful. And they're also excited, but they're also not blind to the whole situation that you're in Jerusalem now, and this is going to be a scary situation because they have heard what you have done over there, because you're including Gentiles, which to the Jews at that time was a big no-no. Don't do it. Our God is holy and He's our God. Despite the fact that God said He's going to be saving everyone through us, He's ours. He's our precious. Like it's terrible. I was not expecting that, but it's good. Carry on. Any case, so this is where we are, but they're saying, listen, we need to focus on this whole situation that these guys are very upset. So you need to let them know, and this is a key point, otherwise you're going to be thinking that Paul is a two-faced person, and he's not. He's saying, you don't have disrespect towards the Jewish faith or towards the Jewish culture. You do realize that Jesus is the fulfillment of our long-awaited traditions and prophecies, but yet we don't have an issue with the Israelite traditions. In Acts 18, just a few chapters earlier, We see Paul shaving his head because he was taking a vow, much like these guys are going to do now. So this is just the context of where we are. And the instructions to Paul was, take these men to be purified, and be purified with them, and pay their expenses so that they may have their heads shaved. Then all will know that what they were told concerning you is nothing, but you yourself are in observance of the law. Then the next day Paul took them in and purified himself with them, and went into the temple, announcing the days of purification would be complete, and an offering would be given for each of them. Okay, so now he's saying this is where we are, and we're taking this whole day of purification, and now we're wondering, why is he doing this? Well, like I said, the whole chameleon thing. Why? Because he's changing his colors, which is a good thing, but he's not trying to be a cat. He's changing where he is, he's changing his personality, but he's not changing his core beliefs. We're going to see a whole lot of changes throughout this message, and when this happens, we're going to leave that guy there every time. You need to focus on how people change their colors. And for me, it's just something that I never really noticed until this message, but it's ridiculous how many times people completely adapt what they do, what they believe, and what they say, and how they act according to what is happening around them. So carrying on. So it's not happening here because he's not there. In any case, when the 7 days were nearly concluded, the Jews from Asia saw him in the temple and stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help! This man is teaching all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place. He even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled the holy place. For he had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, in the city with them, whom they supposed Paul had brought into the temple. He didn't. They just saw him in the city and they assumed. And now see the change in the character of some people here. Then the whole city was provoked, and the people ran together, and they seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple. And immediately the doors were shut while they were trying to kill him. I need to pause there. They were not hurting him. They were literally trying to kill him. They were not beating him. They were not holding him. You need to picture this guy being in the temple, and they were literally trying to kill him. Some people were probably kicking him. Some people were probably throwing him with stuff. And he's just there, just trying to honor God. And they're literally trying to kill him. News came up to the commander of the battalion of the soldiers, basically the police chief, that all Jerusalem was in uproar. He at once took the soldiers and the centurions and ran down to them. When they saw the commander, this being the Jews, and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. So suddenly they realized, oh, wait. Trouble. Let's stop beating him, but let's still complain about him. See the change in colors there, because now they're scared of him, but they're still sort of holding their point. Carrying on. Then the commander came and arrested him, being Paul, and ordered that he be bound with 2 chains. Now I'm thinking, this guy was beaten very close to death. You could probably tie him with floss. He wouldn't be moving. But yet they tied him with 2 chains. Then he asked who he was and what he had done. So now he's asking the people, while he's chained, what has he done? Some in the crowd shouted one thing and some another, because no one really knew what was going on, but they just sort of went in and they fought and they were angry. As he could not learn the truth because of the uproar, he commanded that he be brought into the barracks. And when he came into the stairs, he was carried by the soldiers. He didn't walk, he was carried. He was like sort of limp and broken because of the violence of the people. For the mob of the people followed him, crying out, away with him. As Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the commander, may I speak to you? Being very polite, as you would close to death. He replied, do you know how to speak Greek? So now this guy's like, wait, you speak Greek? He could speak Greek. Are you not the Egyptian who in past days caused an uproar and led 4,000 men of the Sicarii out into the wilderness? So the commander thought he was someone else, which is why he probably bound him. But now you see suddenly Paul being Greek. Why? Because he needs to relate to this person, he needs to understand him. Paul said, I am a Jew of Tarsus of Cilicia, a citizen of no common city. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people. When he had given him permission, Paul stood on the stairs and motioned with his hands to the people. When there was a great silence, he addressed them in the Hebrew language, saying, so now he's making sure that he's Hebrew, he's a Jew. He's making sure that the people can understand him. Nelson Mandela said very wisely, if you speak to someone in English, you're speaking to their heads, obviously apart from if they're English, but if you speak to them in their own language, you speak to their hearts. And this is what he's trying to do. He's trying to make sure that he makes a connection with these people. Now I put the ellipse there because I'm not going to read the whole speech, but the whole speech goes in this fashion. Him affirming that he was born a Jew, he's one of you guys. Him saying that he was a Pharisee and that he was very passionate for God, and that at one stage he was part of the whole group trying to kill the Christians, much like you're trying to kill me now. But I saw the light. Everything's still going fine with his speech. Everybody's still paying attention. Then he carries on and he says, but then God spoke to him. Still not a problem. But then at one point God says to him, Paul said, wait. Then God said to him, then he said to me, depart, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. They listened to him up to this word, and when they lifted up their voices and said, away with such a man from the earth, he is not fit to live. Very often we listen to a certain point and we refuse to listen to the rest of the story because we're so stuck in what we believe. And it's dangerous because then very often we miss the truth. Carrying on. As they shouted and threw off their garments and threw dust in the air, very much is sort of what happened the other day in Grahamstown. Just people were angry, burning stuff, throwing stuff in the air. It's horrible, it's a riot. The commander ordered him to be brought into the barracks and examined with scourging. This is not saying I want to make sure that you're nice and polite. They're hurting him to find out what happened because they can't tell me, so that he might learn what crime they were alleging of him. As they stretched him forth with straps, Paul said to the centurion standing by, is it legal for you to flog an uncondemned Roman citizen? Now he's pulling the Roman card. He's saying, listen guys, is it legal for you to be beating me even though I'm a Roman citizen? On hearing this, the centurion reported to the commander saying, what are you doing? This man is a Roman citizen. Now I sort of stopped it there because we need to make sure and see what is happening here. The centurion, being the lowest form of soldier, is being very direct and sort of contradictory to the commander saying, listen, you need to realize we're in big trouble now. Okay? We need to focus on this. So this is the bottom of the pack telling the highest guy, listen, we're in trouble, and being very direct about it. The commander came and said to him, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? He said, yes. The commander answered, I bought my citizenship for a large sum, because apparently you could buy your citizenship at that stage, which is fine. So Paul said, I was born a citizen. So you're Roman, but I was born a Roman. Literally realize how things are changing very quickly. Therefore, those who were about to examine Paul, now it's examining Paul. It's not more flogging, it's not hitting him, they were examining Paul. Immediately backed away from him, and the commander feared, knowing that he was a Roman citizen, and because he had bound him. On the next day, desiring to know exactly who he was accused by the Jews, he released them and ordered the chief priests and the Sanhedrin to assemble. And he brought Paul down to stand before them. So the next day, it's Paul and this whole group of religious leaders. Paul looked at the Sanhedrin and said, brothers, I have lived. So he's still trying to be nice. He's saying, brothers, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. The high priest Ananias ordered those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. And Paul said to him, God will strike you. Just see the change in Paul suddenly. It's fine for a while, but then eventually it's not fun anymore, because now it's personal. Now you're saying that I should be judged according to the law of God, but yet you're changing the law itself. God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do you sit and judge me according to the law, yet order me to be struck contrary to the law? He's telling him very directly, you're judging me, but you're doing the exact opposite of what you're saying that you're doing. Those who stood by said, do you criticize God's high priest? And Paul said, brothers, I did not know, for this was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of the rulers of your people. Now here my mind is absolutely blown if you consider what just happened. So Paul was half beaten to death the previous day. Now he was struck and he was very angry, and he's sort of getting tired of this whole beating and abuse thing. And then the moment he realized he is contrary to God's law, he steps back and he says, sorry, I didn't know it was him. I thought it was just another guy. He thought it was another Pharisee or Sanhedrin or whatever. But what do we do when we condemn the government? When we speak out about me, at this stage being the person who sort of shares a message, about anyone who is placed above us? Do we follow God's law, Or do we think my opinion matters? Paul's whole opinion was that God's law saying do not speak badly of the evil rulers trumps my opinion any day, regardless of whether it's true or not. Because we know our government is doing wrong, but it's not our place to condemn them in front of God. Then Paul, knowing that this, by the way, just look at this wisdom. I love this section. Then Paul, knowing that the sects of the Sadducees and the other Pharisees cried out amongst the Sanhedrin. So there's two groups of people. The Sanhedrin, so the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. Paul being a Pharisee. Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of a Pharisee. I am being judged for my hope in the resurrection of the dead. When he had said this, dissension arose between the two groups, between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angels, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. So Paul, being very wise, realized that there might be some people here who might agree with me, because the Pharisees believed in the spirit and the resurrection of the dead, and the Sadducees didn't. And although both of them were religious leaders, they sort of allowed this conflict between them. But now they're realizing one of us is being in trouble, is being accused. There was a great outcry, and the scribes from the sect of the Pharisees stood up and argued, "We find no evil in this man." Suddenly he's perfect. We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. When much dissension arose, fearing that Paul would be torn in pieces by them, the commander ordered that the soldiers go down and take him from them by force and bring them into the barracks. Okay, so now he's just go store him there while I figure out what's going on, because this poor commander still has no idea what's going on. The following night, the Lord stood by him, being Paul, and said, "Take courage, Paul, for as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify at Rome." Friends, I cannot get past the amount of changing and confusion this story gets. And so very often we judge other people because they act differently around different places. And I really want to encourage us to sort of be like a chameleon. We as Christians need to be like chameleons. We need to be able to adapt our colors. When we speak to rich folk, we need to have their type of etiquette. When we speak to the poorest of the poor, or the people with, according to some people's opinion, have no culture, then have no culture. Because we need to be able to connect with people. We as Christians need to be able to adapt, not for our sakes, but for them. Because Paul very wisely said, "To the weak I became as the weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. This I do for the gospel's sake, that I might partake of it with you." Now the thing is, very often we look at the church, we look at things around us, and we're so stuck. Especially mature Christians have the biggest flaw in this, because this is my Christian beliefs and I will not bow. But very often we speak over people's heads. We don't speak their language. We don't try to speak Greek to the Greek person. We don't try and lower ourselves to the Hebrew or to the Latin person or to whatever it is. Because this is what Jesus told me, so I'm not budging. But yet the example set before us by Paul was he would go to the temple. I remember Sophia and I going to Thailand, and our host invited us to the temple, and we went to the temple. And when they said take off your shoes, we took off our shoes, because it's not contrary to Christ's law of respecting what other people believe. But the moment they told us, listen, okay, now what you can do is you can take this offering and then you can place it there and then you can bow. We're like, no. And I still remember the confusion in her face, because you came all the way to here, but now you don't want to go further. And we sort of tried to explain in the broken language that we could, but we respect what you believe, but this is not what we serve. We serve another God. And although I could see the confusion in her face, still today, I still feel that she respects the humility that we had in respecting her as a person and not bashing her with a Bible, because it's not going to work. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those wonderful stories where I can say, okay, and on that day we converted her, but we can pray for her, and we can pray for her country. Because you see, friends, especially when we look at ourselves, do we change colors enough? Or do we try and be chameleons at church but try and be eagles at another place? Because the problem is, very often what happens in church is people trying to be chameleons here, but then they go to the wrong places and the wrong people and they try to be eagles and they jump off cliffs. Well, you can figure out the rest. And it just leads to death. And all of us at one point, without us judging, can think to our heads, and I really want to urge you to think just for this moment and be honest, because I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, and whether it's true or not, then if it's true, then you raise your hand. If it's not, then you lower your hand, and you're not going to be asked to speak. But in your life, have you known someone, don't even think about yourself, put yourself aside, someone who was very strong and faithful in the Lord, or at least have heard of someone like that, but somewhere along the line they sort of lost the way, they faded out, they stopped going to church, they stopped doing what they were supposed to be doing. And at one point maybe even took on world religion, saying all roads lead to Rome. You know, every religion is sort of the same. We can all find God in our own way. But yet Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father apart from through me. Do we all maybe know someone like this, someone who has lost their way? I know quite a few. People who have had the strong faith that you admire, and somewhere along the line they lost the plot. And it's sad. And the thing is, we need to go to those people, and we need to try and get them back on track if we can. Personally, I think that's the easiest place to go and evangelize. But yet we always try and go to Timbuktu and try and find people there. God's children and His sheep are lost, but yet we try and navigate Bathurst and all those people. What about the people who have lost their way? But now I also want us to ask a personal question, and you're not going to be raising your hands. If you look at your life now, and your habits, and the way that you believe, in 10 years from now, will you be stronger in your faith? Will you be the same? Or will you have faded away? Where are you? And be honest, it's for yourself. Because I know very often, it's easy for us to think next year, or next week, or next time, or when I get everything on track, then life will be perfect. But very often, we set a direction, we set course. And if we look at our life now, very seldom will we be able to change that except if we change it now. So really, just the thought for today, if you will, I believe that we as Christians need to be able to adapt. We need to be able to get people on their level. Too often Christians try and speak to people who are here, they speak to them there, and then they miss the whole plot because the people have no idea what they're speaking about. Very often we are so stuck to what we believe, we miss why we believe it. We miss why people need to be saved. But then there's also the other trap, the other side of the coin, where we bend so much that we sort of lose ourselves, and we try and be eagles, we try and be slugs, we try and be whatever, because that's eventually what we become. We get this identity crisis where we lose who we are for the sake of others. Why? Because we want their approval, because we want their comfort. But that's not what God has called us for. God has called us to be His people. So I really want to encourage all of us with that. Let's remember to bend and change our colors according to what other people need, so that they might be saved, not for our acceptance. Because whether we like it or not, and I think this for me was the key point, life never adapts to us, ever. We need to adapt to life. And once we can do that, we can reach other people. Dear Lord Jesus, I want to thank You for this morning. I want to thank You for this group of people that You have brought here today. Thank You for the message that You have shared with us today. I want to ask that You please guide us in our lives today. Let this not be a beautiful message that we put on our spiritual magnets and put it on our fridge, Lord. Help us have this in our hearts, Lord. Let this be an active message, a proactive message where we seek You continuously, Lord. Help us read our Bibles. Help us seek You with everything in us, Lord. Guide us in everything that we do today, Lord. Show us those that we can reach. Help us stay sensitive to You. And help us hear You clearly, Lord. Amen.